Roger Boisjoly is standing in a conference room in Brigham City, Utah, watching a screen. It is 11:38 in the morning, January 28, 1986. On that screen, the Space Shuttle Challenger has just cleared the launch tower at Cape Canaveral, Florida. For a few seconds, he feels something close to relief. Because for 6 months, Roger Boisjoly has believed this exact rocket might explode the instant it leaves the ground. It does not. It climbs. At 58 seconds, a small flame appears at a joint near the base of the right booster. The exact joint he warned them about, in writing, twice. At 73 seconds, the sky over the Atlantic Ocean opens into a fireball, live, on national television, in front of millions of people, including classrooms full of schoolchildren who had been gathered specifically to watch a schoolteacher become the first ordinary citizen launched into space. 7 people are now dead. And Roger Boisjoly is still standing there, watching the smoke trails fall toward the ocean, holding a piece of knowledge that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He knew. He had told them. He had told them in a memo 6 months earlier, in writing, using the words, catastrophe of the highest order, loss of human life. He had told them again the night before, on a recorded conference call, for hours. They voted anyway. He was not allowed to vote. This is the story of the man who did everything right and still had to watch it happen. Rewind 6 months. July 31st, 1985. Roger Boisjoly is a 47-year-old mechanical engineer at Morton Thiokol, the company that builds the solid rocket boosters for NASA's Space Shuttle program. He sits down and writes a memo to his own vice president of engineering, a man named Bob Lund. The subject is a rubber ring, 2 of them actually, stacked at every joint where the booster rocket's massive steel segments connect to each other. These O-rings are not a minor seal. They are the only thing standing between rocket fuel burning at thousands of degrees and the open sky. Boisjoly had just examined a booster recovered from an earlier flight that launched in unusually cold weather. What he found should have stopped the program in its tracks. The primary O-ring at 2 joints had eroded so badly it had failed completely. Only a secondary ring, never designed to be the actual seal, had kept the rocket from tearing itself apart. Cold temperature, he had determined, made the rubber stiffer, slower to flex into place in the critical fraction of a second after ignition, when the seal mattered most. He wrote it plainly. If this is not corrected, he warned, the result will be a catastrophe of the highest order, the loss of human life. He was not guessing. He was the specialist. This was his job. He was telling his own company, in writing, precisely what would happen if nothing changed. Nothing changed. NASA and Thiokol studied the problem for months. They presented findings to NASA headquarters in August. They acknowledged the erosion was real. They proposed a long-term redesign that would take more than 2 years. In the meantime, the official judgment was that the risk was acceptable. Flights would continue. A sociologist who later studied the disaster gave this pattern a name, the normalization of deviance. A danger gets identified. Nothing explodes, so the danger quietly becomes a little more normal, a little more acceptable, until it does not feel like an emergency anymore. It was always an emergency. It simply had not happened yet. 5 months pass. It is now January 27th, 1986, the night before the rescheduled Challenger launch. This mission is carrying Krista McAuliffe, a New Hampshire schoolteacher, chosen through a national competition to become the first private citizen in space. Her flight has been built into school curriculums across the country. Millions of children are planning to watch live, in their classrooms, tomorrow morning. The forecast for Cape Canaveral tonight predicts the temperature will drop to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Launch time temperature is expected near 30. NASA has never launched a shuttle anywhere close to that cold. Boisjoly and his colleague Bob Ebeling are alarmed the moment they see the number. Ebeling makes the first call, reaching Thiokol's representative directly at Kennedy Space Center. That evening, an emergency teleconference is arranged between engineers and managers in Utah and NASA officials at Marshall Space Flight Center and Kennedy Space Center. Boisjoly presents the data. The predicted temperature is roughly 20 degrees colder than any previous launch. There is no test data proving the seal will work at that temperature, because no shuttle has ever come close to flying in conditions like it. He and fellow engineer Arnie Thompson argue, forcefully, for hours, that the launch should be delayed. NASA pushes back hard. One official, George Hardy, tells the engineers he is appalled by their recommendation. Another, Lawrence Mulloy, asks them, with open frustration, exactly when they would like NASA to launch. Next April? Under that pressure, Thiokol's senior vice president, Jerry Mason, asks for a break in the call to discuss internally. What happens during that break is the moment this entire disaster turns on. The Thiokol managers meet privately. The engineers, including Boisjoly, the man who wrote the original warning, are deliberately excluded from the room. Mason turns to Bob Lund, the same Bob Lund who received Boisjoly's memo 6 months earlier. Mason asks him to take off his engineering hat and put on his management hat. 4 men vote. The engineers do not get a vote. 3 vote to launch. Lund pauses. Then he also votes to launch. When the call resumes, Thiokol reverses its position. They tell NASA the data is inconclusive. They recommend launching as scheduled. NASA asks if anyone objects. Nobody does. Roger Boisjoly is in that building. He presented the evidence hours earlier. He is not in the room for the vote that overrides it. The next morning, the temperature at the launch pad is recorded at 36 degrees, the coldest launch in space shuttle history. Roger Boisjoly drives to the Thiokol offices in Utah, already certain, in his own words later, that he had fought like hell to stop that launch, and lost. He gathers with colleagues to watch a live video feed. 11:38 in the morning. Liftoff. Relief. For a few seconds. 58 seconds. A flame. Exactly where he said it would be. 73 seconds. The sky breaks open. Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, Krista McAuliffe. All 7, gone, in front of the children who had been told to watch. In the room in Utah, Bob Ebeling begins trembling, then weeping loudly. Roger Boisjoly starts crying too. President Reagan ordered a commission. Boisjoly was called to testify. He told them about the memo, about the call, about the vote that excluded the engineers, which he called, on the record, an unethical decision-making forum resulting from intense customer intimidation. It was the first time most of it became public. 2 NPR reporters had already obtained the same account, anonymously, from Boisjoly and Ebeling, weeks earlier, both men independently describing the identical sequence of events. The commission concluded what Boisjoly had been saying the entire time. Cold caused the O-ring to fail. Management overrode its own engineers under pressure from NASA officials who needed to keep the schedule. He had been right. About everything. In writing. 6 months early. For this, he was not protected. His colleagues largely turned on him. One reportedly told his wife Roberta that if people lost their jobs because of the fallout, he would personally drop his kids off at the Boisjoly's doorstep and blame Roger. The same technical judgment that had made him respected for years now made him radioactive inside the company that employed him. He resigned. At one of his commission appearances, almost nobody in the room offered him any personal comfort. Only one person did. Astronaut Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, serving on the commission, embraced him after he testified. He said simply, Years later, she was the only one. The only one. For close to 30 years afterward, he traveled the country, giving more than 300 lectures on engineering ethics, trying to make sure no engineer would ever again write the correct warning, watch it get ignored, and then have to watch the predicted disaster unfold exactly as written. Bob Ebeling carried his own version of this for 3 decades, believing privately he could have done more. He finally spoke publicly under his own name in 2016, shortly before his death, and received forgiveness and gratitude from strangers around the world. Roger Boisjoly died of cancer on January 6, 2012. He was 73. He did everything an engineer is supposed to do. He found the danger. He documented it. He escalated it again the night before it mattered most. He argued for hours. He was excluded from the vote by the people above him. And then he had to stand in a room and watch 7 people die, exactly the way he said they would. If you have ever told someone in charge that something was about to go wrong and watched them choose not to listen, subscribe to Dark Verdict, because this is the most painful version of a pattern this channel keeps finding inside the institutions we are taught to trust most. He fought like hell to stop that launch. Those are his exact words. 3 weeks later, still crying, to a journalist who had promised, at the time, to never use his name. The launch happened anyway. 73 seconds later, 7 people were dead. And the man who had warned them was standing in a room in Utah, watching it happen on a screen, having done absolutely everything right. If this story affected you the way it should, subscribe to Dark Verdict. Every case here is documented and sourced. And if you want to see what happens when the person being ignored is inside an intelligence agency instead of an engineering firm, the Robert Hansen case is on this channel right now.